This is going to be an introduction to Python. This course is going to be focused on trying to understand why people use Python, what Python exactly is, and how it differentiates itself from other programming languages and similar utilities. Okay, so what is Python? Python is a high-level interpreted general-purpose programming language. Some of the strictly kind of special things about Python is that it emphasizes code readability and allows people that code on Python to express concepts in a lot fewer lines in code than languages like C++ or Java. To kind of highlight this, you can try and write some kind of print out in C++ or C#, and it would look something like this. It would be like std out, and then you'd have to put like a colon, and then you'd have to put a bunch of information, and then you would put something else. So there's a lot more that you have to do, a lot more syntax that has to be there, and so on. But when you're writing in Python, all you have to do is just put the word print, and then you put what you want to print. So like hello, and that is it. So this easy readability is basically why a lot of people use it. That's a very small example, but that can be attributed to basically the entire language. Okay, Python does support multiple programming language paradigms, which means a lot of different languages use different operational conditions as they process things. So Python is what's known as an object-oriented language, which means that it calls on objects to be able to basically design its functionality, whereas non-object-oriented languages like C, for instance, have to use classes and things like this to call on functionality. So a lot of modern day, let's say high-level programming languages are object-oriented programming languages like Java, Perl, Ruby, and Python. So all of these are all object-oriented, okay? And they also have functional programming, which means we can define functions inside of our programs and then call on those functions to do a bunch of different stuff. So who created Python? It's created by a guy named Guido von Rossum. I can't ever pronounce his name correctly, but it was in the 1980s, but it didn't get its first official release until 1991. Python has been developed very quickly and to a very large extent since then, and it is pretty much one of the most utilized programming languages on Earth at the moment. It's pretty much has one of the highest popularities out of like the top, let's say 5 or 10 languages, right? I would put it squarely in the top 5. Yeah, so this is something that's nice, and the continuous work of a lot of people have been contributing to Python since then, making their own additions to the official language, which has been a really good thing. And this guy is still around, actually. One of the good things about Python is that it can actually run on any type of platform. It can run on Linux, Apple, Android, iOS, and on Windows. There's a lot of things we'll talk about that kind of extenuate this point, but the primary idea is that if you just have the Python executable, it can basically run agnostic to any type of operating system. Python also has a lot of different domains that it has extensible functionality through additional libraries and things like that you can use. And one example of this is you can use Python, and a lot of people don't know this. Most people think Python is just, they say, a general purpose language, and it's not really used for much outside of that. But Python is very commonly used for web development. For instance, like Netflix and Dropbox use Python very heavily in their web apps. So this is something that's very interesting. There are frameworks like Django and Flask that enable developers to build these kind of web applications with Python as a backend language. Most people just think you run either C#, PHP, Java, and JavaScript to design, but you can also use Flask or Django to design your web applications with Python instead, which is actually becoming more of a common thing. You have data science and analytics. There are some other external libraries like NumPy, Pandas, and Matplotlib that allow us for data manipulation. And you'll see a lot of data scientists. If you ever take any kind of course on being a data scientist, you'll notice that that any data scientist worth their salt has done something in Python for data analytics at some point. So it's a very data heavy language. It's one of its primary use cases, actually. It is also very good for artificial intelligence. It's pretty much a choice for many people learning AI projects and running AI projects. There are libraries like TensorFlow and PyTorch that allow us to develop and implement machine learning models and things such of that nature. We'll kind of touch on that in a moment. We also have automation and scripting. Now, its use case in cybersecurity has kind of been additive in this way that it has been more and more heavily used as time goes on for automation scripts in cybersecurity. So say some kind of cyber event happens, you would utilize a automation mechanism that has a Python script attached to it that allows some kind of Python script to execute and remediate some kind of vulnerability or stop some kind of connection from happening on your network. So this is the idea behind that. So it's a very commonly utilized thing because of its ease of use. You also have game development. Now, I got to say, this is probably more of a minor part. Not many games are developed with Python. The framework for Pygame is good, but it's not like super robust enough to make like AAA titles or anything like that. A lot of web applications or games and things like that may have a portion done in Python, but the majority of games are not developed in Python. But it does have a library for framework of creation of 2D games specifically, which is pretty cool. Then we have an extensive standard library that comes with Python that you can call on to do a lot of different things. You can do operating system functions, data functions, just built into Python without having to call in an external library, like import it or anything like that. You have math, file system. You can do file formats and reconfiguring things from JSON to CSV and so on. And then text processing to like pull data from one source and then write it or configure it or transform it to another destination utilizing those libraries. So it has a lot of extensive libraries that come with it, which is why a lot of people use Python. We're going to go through some of the companies that actually use Python in today's world now. And I'll give you some examples of why Python is basically really good for this, right? So one of the companies that use Python the heaviest is actually Google. They actually use two other languages, which is C++, and they have something called Golang as well, or Google language. This allows Google actually started developing Python and being a very large contributor to Python in 2012. The creator was employed by Google for quite a long time. So Python was being developed large part in by Google before and it still is to this day. So that's something very interesting. We also have some of the other things with Google. Since Google owns YouTube, they actually utilize a bunch of systems based on Python, like log analysis, code review tools, and things like that. There are a lot of libraries that they call in to utilize their functions, like YouTube. It was written in PHP, but it was replaced by Python for a lot of different reasons. And we'll talk about some of those reasons kind of like when we get to the next slide. But they started utilizing Python because it was a little bit more dynamic, a little faster with raw data processing than things like PHP. PHP is a good framework, but it's maybe not as fast or as good with dealing with stream data or large amounts of data, right? Okay, and then we have Netflix. Netflix is actually it's not run on Python necessarily, like its primary language is not run on Python, but they have a lot of Python integrations into this that help Netflix's streaming engine kind of make, and this is kind of a weird concept because you probably never heard of it, but basically as text or as data is coming to get displayed to your screen and stuff like that, Netflix has these programs written in Python called VMAF, or like things like that that support VMAF. And it's basically, it'll take a video feed and see, okay, this is how I could standard display it to you and what it would look like. But these algorithms that it'll run it through, they're Python-based programs that'll run it through, will alter the alter the view of what the data would look like to you. So maybe the data will come in a certain format, but that doesn't look the best to the human eye. So these Python programs will alter it to have a better, and this is basically just a scoring system, VMAF. It's just a scoring system that allows basically to judge the quality of a picture, right? So utilizing these Python libraries, these Python programs with Netflix basically allowed them to create better VMAF and MESFS, which is a different scoring system, but allowed them to basically get better resolution, not necessarily on paper, but on to the human eye, which is what the scoring system is for. So a little bit like a weird concept there, but Netflix has definitely been able to utilize Python to increase the viewability of their content in essence. Instagram has also worked. Instagram, they did a lot of work on Python over the past few years as well. They were able to basically, it was Meta as a whole, but they developed Meta or Facebook on the Django web framework, which is written in Python, right? There is a functionality in all web, well, not all, but like a lot of different web languages or web development languages, or just languages like C# is a good example of this. There's kind of a difference between C# and C++, whereas C++, for instance, you have to allocate memory manually and deallocate memory manually in C++, whereas the C# will kind of automatically, in theory, recapture the memory that isn't being utilized anymore. There's a similar function in Python called the Python garbage collection, which reclaims memory by collecting and freeing unused data that's not being called into any function or any process. By utilizing this, they were able to gain more capacity, but eventually they started losing the gains by disabling this by default. So it has built-in functionality to kind of stop memory leaks from happening, and also to kind of save your memory. But this is the idea that Meta kind of initially disabled this functionality, but found out they actually needed it later on, which is interesting. And then Dropbox, this is actually where the creator of Python ended up working later on. It was written in Python, and this is the reason why, and it includes a lot of version of the Python interpreter, utilizing some other things like TypeScript, which is kind of like JavaScript, Rust, and Go. And Python, its readability and simplicity of designing programs in it have kind of facilitated some of this more quick development and enabling them to get more features on their website faster out than other languages or other frameworks would allow you to, like AngularJS and JS Node and things like that, a little bit more complex. And then we have NASA. NASA uses a lot of Python, and they call on these libraries like NumPy and SciPy for scientific computing. The degree and the amount of mathematic algorithms that they have to run to get accurate numbers for some of their projects has to be to the utmost place. It has to be to like the thousandth or the millionth place correct for them to successfully like plan something mathematically that will work in reality, right? They're able to use this, and there's also something called Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks is kind of like a tool that allows you to visualize your books and things like that, like your run books and all your scripts a little bit easier in one location. It's a very good tool if you're developing, especially with data-heavy things. Jupyter Notebooks is a very good tool set for that. So they utilize this as well, although it's not Python specific. Jupyter Notebook can be used with a lot of different things, but Python's one of them. Its flexibility allows NASA to do a lot of different types of mathematical calculations and simulations. A lot of like collision simulations with asteroids and things like that are actually accomplished in Python written programs. And it's used in projects like Mars rover, Hubble Space Telescope, and so on to basically, because it just has a lot of reliability in its processing capabilities. So this is really nice. And then we have Spotify. Spotify uses very heavy data analytics for their infrastructure. They basically don't want somebody manually telling the algorithm what somebody should listen to or things like that. So it has an automated system based on data analytics, say like you listen to this kind of genre from this time period, you listen this long, and so on. It takes all that data to provide you with the best user experience with Spotify. And this is written, this data analytic program is written in Python that Spotify utilizes. So it's very it's very strong in that way. So it gives a kind of seamless user experience there. So some of the importance of Python and why we should really care about it. Python is an important programming language because a lot of things run on it at this point. And it may have been important in the past, but it's really becoming important now because a lot of things like AI and machine learning are becoming way larger types of tasks or way larger fields. Same thing, it also got a boost when blockchain technology first came out and cryptocurrency really started to run off the ground because a lot of those programs for mining and things like that, calculating blockchains, were actually written in Python initially. It is a very high demand skill to have for these reasons because everything is AI integrated, and a lot of people utilize, especially smaller companies, utilize these Python libraries to get that initial AI functionality for their machine learning models or however they're using it. So there's a lot of different diversity, and this is one of the nice things about it. You'll see things like C# can be used for web development. C# is often used for applications and things like that as well. They're kind of a general use program language, but some languages kind of get pigeonholed into doing just one thing. Like nobody really designs web applications with just C anymore. They don't design on desktop applications or things like that with JavaScript, although you could. They generally don't. So this is kind of the idea. We kind of just avoid they kind of get pigeonholed, whereas Python hasn't really managed to get pigeonholed. It's good for AI, it's good for command line apps, business apps, web application, game development. It can do a lot of things, which is why it's so popular right now. Some of the advantages of using it over other programming languages, and I can't tell you this enough, that the ease of learning for Python is a lot easier than other languages. Coming from somebody that learned C# like a while ago, did C# courses and stuff like that, and other scripting languages and so on. The ease of learning Python was the easiest language to learn by far, and it's really not even a contest. There are other languages that are also similar and pretty easy to learn, like Perl or like Ruby to some extent and so on. There's some other pretty decent ones out there, but by far I'd say Python is really the easiest one. It has easy memory management. Like I said, it doesn't have some of those problems that C# had in the past or C++ has, where memory allocation becomes a big headache because you start doing memory leaks just because you forgot to reallocate it somewhere or forgot to dump the memory off and things like that. So this is something a little bit difficult. And then you have documentation. There's a lot of documentation on Python. Anything that you're basically going to try has been done before, and there's probably somebody that has a forum about it. So this is something nice. There's nothing you're going to try pretty much that somebody hasn't done already as a general rule, especially when starting out. So that's kind of a good thing about Python. It has a lot of integration capabilities, like we said, with all sorts of different services, game development, web design, and things of that nature. And then it has high-level data structures. Python is at its most core a little bit more built to deal with a lot of data than other programs are. The way that it deals with data and the way that it stores data when it's processing it is a little bit different for its engine than other types of other programming languages and things like that, which makes it a little bit better for processing very complex numbers and things of that nature. Some of the key features and characteristics here, we have the readability and expressive syntax. Python kind of cares, and this is maybe one of the bad things, although it could be a good thing. Python cares about indentations a lot, whereas other programming languages don't really care about indentations. Python really cares about its syntax a lot, right? So for instance, I could write a C# or C++ code, and I could basically write it all on one line, and it would work perfectly fine. I don't recommend anybody does that, but running Python files sometimes can get kind of frustrating, I guess, because you'll have one indentation or something like that missing, and that's actually what's what otherwise would be perfectly workable code, because it takes indentation seriously as where you're separating your code into different mechanisms. Okay, so that's something it's very expressive. It is an interpreted language, not a it's not a compiled language. All that realistically means is that when you have a compiled language, it gets transformed before it's in runtime, before it gets executed, into what's known as a machine language, kind of working closer to the hardware before it gets executed. So like you'll have to, every time you run in like a compiled language, you'll have to compile the code before you can actually execute it. And it goes through like basically a runtime check to see if your compiled code has any errors in it. Whereas an interpreted language kind of just takes what you're trying to say and converts it into something that's executable instead of having to go through this conversion to machine language. This is actually something that's, I wouldn't say negative, it's just different about Python, is that it is an interpreted language, so it is a little bit technically less efficient than some of its counterparts like C++, because those compiled languages are able to run a little closer to the hardware, a little bit more efficiently without having to go through this kind of intermediary step for this high level representative language, right? You have dynamic typing. You can do a lot of different data types and things like that, which is nice. There's a lot of libraries, which we talked about, multi-paradigm programming for all sorts of use cases, object-oriented programming and things of that nature, classes and structs and importing different objects and so on. And then you have platform independence. It doesn't care what operating system that you're on. A lot of programming languages, to their credit, do not have this problem either, but some are kind of specific, like .NET Framework is more specific to Windows. So things like C or C# are more specific to just working on those platforms and so on, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And then we have community support. There is a huge community out there of Python developers. If you go to Python's official website, there's community. I think it's community.python.org or .com. They have a very large community forum for all sorts of things like that. If you go on Stack Overflow, they have a huge community on Stack Overflow for Python specifically. Same thing with Stack Exchange. They have Python forums in there as well. So there's a huge community support for anything that you're basically trying to do, which is what a lot of people like about this as well. So it's really nice. And then they have a readable syntax, like we said, and this is just an example of this. You can just like easily define variables by just putting a simple word here and then defining it with something else. And then you can call on those variables inside of your functions by assigning those functions to other variables and then calling those variables in. So it's kind of just a very easy flow when designing things. So this is the kind of idea behind it, that the syntax is very easily readable. Whereas if you work in things like C++ or C#, you'll have problems reading basically how things get transferred from one function to another, or the readability is definitely a lot harder because you actually have to put a lot more code than just something simple as this, which is kind of a good thing. Okay, and then projects with Python. Like I said, if you want to do things like this, you could basically create things from the Django web framework. And you can create really nice web apps, honestly. A lot of e-commerce sites are written in the Django framework because they're pretty simplistic and they don't need a lot of stuff, but it's really good. So this is what some of those examples look like of doing something with Django. Same thing. This is a customer management software or a content management software rather, to manage different types of media for all sorts of purposes that you want. And then you have pandas. Pandas is for data analytics, so you can utilize that. It's commonly used in financial and scientific data exploration, so you can see all sorts of data analytics from basically a raw data set. You can derive a lot of correlations, charts, and things like that utilizing pandas, which is really nice. You have machine learning libraries like TensorFlow and PyTorch that allow you to write your own little kind of programs. In this one, it's basically a video recognition program that these people wrote that can look at their face and then see something similar and kind of compare them. And you can see it right here actually in their code that it says load image file and it says Valen1 JPEG. So it's basically a picture of their face. And then it says that you basically need to encode both of that image into something machine understandable. Once it converts it, it's going to take basically a kind of video or picture stream of your face and compare it to those encoded values and then pop out something that says, hey, you know, what does this look like? Who does this look like? And that's machine learning at a very simplistic level, but it has these built in, or not built in, but available libraries to pull in a lot of that functionality. So you don't have to write those programs yourself. You simply just call them into your program, and yeah, and all the work's kind of done for you already. It is used a lot for machine learning. Like I said before, you can do correlative graphs. So it'll correlate like this section of data into a chart, and then it can make its own observations of what it thinks is going to happen. Python is commonly used a lot in financial analytics, especially for like stock market things. A lot of programs like predictive analysis. If you've ever heard of this, it's called quantitative trading, where you basically feed data into your own programs and then it tells you what to buy because it understands, whatever rule sets you put, it understands where the stock is going. So this is called quantitative trading, and you have this programmatically sell and trade stocks for you. So that's the idea behind it. Okay, and then you have things like Beautiful Soup. We've kind of, if you've been around the class for a while, we've actually used Beautiful Soup a few different times for automation, and you can use that for port scanning with this. You'll call in like socket is a sub function here that you can call in to do a lot of this functionality. You could also do web scraping utilizing Beautiful Soup for this, or Scapy, and there's a few others as well. Basically, you can call this to look through a website, for instance, for all sorts of relevant data that you might be interested in, right? So it's kind of an automated system for almost not necessarily penetration testing, but like information gathering or reconnaissance on a specific site or something like that. Then you also have game development. We've kind of talked about this before. You have platform games and brawlers. They're all 2D basically, so they're not the most complex games and things like that. Pygame is not a super developed library. It is very good for what it is, but it's not super developed. So you'll see Pygame, and I would kind of like encourage people to try it out as a very easy way to get into developing in Python, because it's kind of fun, whereas a lot of the other tutorials that you may go through are kind of rough and kind of boring. Pygame will give you a way to develop in Python and learn about functions and things like that, while still being able to like make your own game and have some fun with it. So this is kind of nice, right? Internet of Things devices commonly use Python because of its lightweight and diverse utilization. A lot of things like with Raspberry Pi have GPS module or modules that can be put in them, and then you can run a program to take the data from the GPS module and basically tell you where you are, kind of. And then you have temperature stations that can be built out of these just with very simple pinouts. And you can see the Raspberry Pi logo here. That's a Raspberry Pi, probably like a Raspberry Pi 3 or 4 or something like that. A smaller generation, like a nano Raspberry. I don't remember what they call it, but something to that effect. So that's the idea here, is you can get those to work with very simple configurations, which is really great. Okay, and like I said, they have community support on their web page. You can just go to Python. I want to say it's python.org. I'm trying to remember exactly right now because I can't. I believe it's python.org, but you can go on there and you can see that. They have a very large community base, and same thing like Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange. And then we have code editors. There's a lot of code editors that support Python. It's not just one or two. It's actually a lot of them. One of the kind of ones that I recommend you start with is either PyCharm, which is a really good one. It's actually a JetBrains IDE, I believe. And then you have VS Code, which is a very good one to start working in. The benefit of using VS Code is if you can use VS Code to start programming in Python, you can use VS Code to program in anything. So this is kind of why it gets recommended a lot. You could pull in just, and I'll just kind of show you here. I'll just pull a VS Code and show you. So if I wanted to, I could just like open up a new file here, or actually, I could just go to my extensions tab on the left, and you can see how I can just download Python, like to have this IDE, which is just a platform for developing programs. I can just have this automatically download, or I can just download Python. So this IDE understands Python. I could also come in here, get it to do PowerShell and get it to do Bash and get it to do everything else that I want it to do. But Python is one of those included ones. So if I want to, I can just go to a new file. I can just type in test.py. And I didn't hit enter, so it didn't create it. .py. And then hit enter. There it goes. It's going to ask me where I want to save it. I'll just save it in my downloads or whatnot. And then I have this Python file. So now when I put something like print, and I just want to put hello world, and then I had to put that in parentheses. Oops. And I put print hello world, and then I hit execute on this one, just run. And then you can see right here that it actually just says like hello world in my console. So this is just like a very fast way to start developing in any language, right? It's not specifically made for Python, so you'll find the debugging is probably maybe not as good as some of the others, but that's the idea behind it. Okay, and they have code editors like Z for Mac OS if that's what you're working on, and I believe VS Code is actually available for Mac OS as well. I'll have to double check on that, but I believe there is a version of it that works on Mac OS anyway. So you have that as an option if you have a Mac. We're going to move into the Q&A section of this presentation. Do you have any questions you'd like to discuss about anything to do with Python or anything that we covered? I have one. It is available. You're saying in Mac OS it is, VS Code is? That's good. Yeah, that's what I figured it was. And then let me just make sure. Yeah, it is python.org. So I was actually right about that. It was python.org here. And then, like I said, you have this community tab that you can go to. And they have all sorts of different stuff. So you can do all sorts of stuff. You can go to Python Discord, community survey. There's a lot of different things, frequently asked questions, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff that you can have in here for any questions that you ever may have. And there's a wiki in here, which tells you basically everything you could ever need to know about specific functionality in Python, which is really good. So yeah, Python overall is a very good programming language. Definitely a lot of use cases in there. And Pygame is not part of this, but if you ever were interested, you can go to pygame.org. It's actually a separate website. So you can download pygame.org in here, and you can develop inside of that, which is kind of cool because there's a lot of projects. You can look at these if you'd like to. There's a ton of different projects inside of Pygame that you can go through. And like I said, they're all kind of rudimentary because it's not really meant for super complex things, but you can see all of these in here, which is really cool. Yeah, yeah, so this class started at 12:15, yeah, that's correct. So I'll leave these links in the chat though, so everybody can have them. Oops. I definitely think somebody that if I was going to give advice to somebody who wanted to start with this, definitely try and utilize Pygame as like a way to learn Python as well if you're really interested in it. All right. Do we have any other questions? Anything you'd like to discuss or are curious about? Doesn't necessarily have to be Python related. If you have anything you'd like to talk about, please just let me know. That's what I'm here for.
Hello, Alex. I got a question.
Sure.
Um, this is kind of like my first CyberWarrior session. Would they be more related Python masterclasses?
Yeah,
Or
this is an introductory class, and
okay,
we had a Python scripting class about, it must have been 4 weeks ago or something like that, Isaac. I don't remember
Yep.
exactly.
Yep, it was.
Yes. So 4 weeks ago, and that was actually talking about how to utilize Python functions, defining things like that, calling variables into functions, utilizing stuff for cybersecurity. There's a lot in there. So yeah, so we'll have those classes again for sure.
Yeah, and
can we
also if you
expect to see more of
wanna,
those?
yeah, and also if you wanna, like, join another section, we'll have another one today at no, it's at 6, sorry, on incident response. So if you wanna access that at 6 p.m., you can just go into the live online on the online platform, and then when it says incident response live class, you'll see it. You'll start at 6.
Yeah. That's a good question, though. Yeah, for sure. And we'll have a lot more sessions about a variety of different topics and things like that. So, okay. All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming then. If you have any questions, always feel free to just reach out to me.